Jen. If you don't know me, I am a piano teacher of over 25 years, and on this channel I would like to share with you any tips and tricks and techniques, instructional videos, anything I can think of to help you or your child learn to play the piano and enjoy learning to play the piano as well. I would really love you to subscribe. If you also hit the little bell icon, then you'll find out first of any new videos that I upload. Today I want to talk to you about a subject that is very close to my heart: practice. I think my mum would be finding it very ironic that I'm making this video at all, to be honest, with all the stuff that she had to go through to get me to practice when I was younger. This video really wants to talk about the benefits and the importance really of a practice routine or schedule and how it can help you or the person learning. It's definitely probably I would say the biggest topic of conversation I have as a teacher with parents and with the students themselves. So I think this will definitely give you some information that's probably very well worth knowing. So first thing, why do I think that it's ironic that I'm making this video? Well, when I was learning as a child, my mum did physically lock me in a room to practice. It was that bad. I think a couple of things were sort of at play there. One would be my age. I was very young. But probably one of the biggest things really, which was something that she wouldn't have known about, was that my practice was never at the same time. So it would always be the case that she would say to me, oh, you need to practice your piano now. And I'd already decided I was doing something completely different. I was going to go and play this game or that game or whatever else. And so it really felt like I was being pulled away from something to go and practice, which is never the precedent that you want to set. So actually that little issue is something that we will discuss. But I personally think that might have been one of the biggest contributors to the arguments that we used to have about practice. What we ended up doing was my mum had set me a practice schedule. It wasn't the same time every day because obviously 2 days really are the same. There are things to do with clubs and all kinds of commitments. So it wasn't really the same time, but it was a set time for that day of the week. And because I knew it was coming, I fought it less. I'm not going to lie to you and say that, I fell into practicing really well overnight because I had a schedule. It's not really like that. It did take a little while, but the more that became part of my routine, the more I expected it, the less I argued. And the funny thing about practice, and my students will tell you the same, it's not the practicing that's the issue, it's the sitting down to practice that is often the problem. So if we can sort that part of it out, fingers crossed the rest will start to slot into place. I will go more into detail about the routine itself when you do sit down to practice a little bit later, and also in another video. One thing to note is that as a child develops and matures, the time at which they practice will probably need to change as much for developmental reasons as anything else. I see it with my teenagers. In fact, nowadays actually slightly earlier than that, where the morning practice suddenly stops working for them and actually a later time is much better. I went through that too, where I found mornings very difficult. I was no longer getting up really early off my own volition, and knowing that part of your child is very helpful because you can always adjust those times as you go. Something we briefly touched upon was the routine within the practice session itself. To go more into this, we really need to know the difference between practice, what I would call concentrated practice, and playing through. So concentrated practice is something where you would take, say, a piece that you're learning and really work on one part of it that's either completely brand new, a little bit trickier, and be looking at it with a lot more focus. That kind of practice actually does need to be time capped. The other sort of practice, if you like, is what I would call playing through, which is just going from beginning to end. That actually is what most pianists will fall into. They'll fall into a playing through pattern where they put their piece that they're supposed to be working on the piano, start at the beginning, and just get kind of lost playing from beginning to end without that focus. So really, if we're talking about a routine, you do have to get those two things very clear first, and that will help you to set up the routine properly. So the routine I would establish, and this is a very rough draft if you like, or we'll, again, as I said, we'll go into more detail about this later on. First of all, you want to start with a warm-up. Scales, technical exercises, even an old piece, something that you already know, is a really good way to warm your hands and your brain up. The next thing that would happen would be concentrated practice. So that would be bars this to this, something that is more focused and technical maybe. That would need to take the next part of it so that your brain is warmed up but not tired just yet. The third part to it would be a cool down or a playing through. So quite often it's quite satisfying, to be honest, to do the playing through part of it, because then you get to see how the bit you've worked on slots in. Don't worry if it doesn't slot in straight away. Your hands will fight you, so that's perfectly normal. But that playing through can really help you to see how it's gone. But again, don't judge it if it doesn't go the way you think it will. Some form of cool down, even scales or an old piece, again, that would be really helpful. One of the nicest things I actually think is to play something to finish that you already know that you can play. It's a real confidence booster. It's not something that your brain would have to really think about. Quite often, if you know it well enough, your hands will be with the muscle memory already, so you won't even have to worry necessarily about what they're doing. And that can be a really nice way to end a practice. It's quite often the way that I would end a practice, to be honest with you. So playing through, old piece, and then you can walk away feeling quite happy. So how long should this time capped practice be? There are many factors, to be honest, that are going to go into that. I would say you would have to talk to your teacher. Things like age, level of concentration, whether you have a performance or an exam coming up, those kinds of things, even just how a person concentrates ordinarily. Some are quite happy to sit for a decent while and really focus on something, and others would find that a little bit trickier. That's fine, there's no right or wrong. You just have to find what works for you. So I would honestly say talk to a teacher. They might be able to give you some guidance, and then you can just play around with it. It's got to be flexible though. Don't put yourself under any pressure. That time capped practice, with all the best intentions, sometimes your head just won't be there. Sometimes you've had a hard day, you've got a headache. For the adults, you might have been at work all day looking after the kids, doing bedtime. To sit down and do a half an hour of time capped practice, and obviously that does exclude the warm up and the cool down part of it, that's a big ask. So you are best off being flexible, being honest with yourself, and keeping your bits to work on next to you so that you know what you did achieve, and don't beat yourself up if it didn't go the way that the last practice went, which was half an hour. That's absolutely fine. The most important thing really is regularity. Regularity will keep your fine motor skills going, especially for the children, the dexterity and the muscle memory there. It keeps you reading, which is a really good thing for a musician, pianist particularly, to be able to do. So I think perhaps focus slightly less on the length of time maybe, and focus on the routine itself. So it starts with this, then goes to this, and the rest of it can be interchangeable. So this is the important question. How can you create and stick to a practice routine? Stick to is the main thing, isn't it? Let's be honest about this. So for teens and adults, I would suggest that you get your calendar or a diary or a planner of some kind, write down everything you do within a week that would be a regular commitment. Don't leave anything out. Literally everything you can think of. If I was doing this, I would have to write down all the housework stuff that I do in there as well, because that does impact my week and what I can get done. So literally write everything down. The second thing you want to do is to do with that length of practice. So again, speak to your teacher, take all of those things that we discussed earlier into account, come up with a rough plan as to what maybe the worst case scenario might be, and that way you can always shorten it if you need to. The third thing is, once you know those two bits above, have a look then at when you think practice might work best for you. You do really need to know those two things above, because there's really not much point in saying, I'm going to practice for half an hour to find that you actually don't have half an hour spare in the day. I find that quite a lot, to be honest, with all the commitments that I have going on. So you do have to think about both of those before you even start to decide where you're going to put this. Underestimating the length of your practice session can mean that you don't make much progress. And it just leads to frustration, not always so much on the part of the teacher, but on the part of the person playing as well. At the same time, don't overestimate it. If you overestimate the amount of time you need, it's just going to put you off altogether. If you sit down and think, I need an hour to practice this, most of us don't have an hour in the day to spare. So, it would just be like a case of saying, well, if I need an hour to practice and I don't have it, I won't practice at all. So you do have to go for something in the middle. Children and teens, again, consider the time of day for developmental reasons as much as anything else. It would be not prudent to probably give a teenager a 7 o'clock practice session for half an hour in the morning. It might work in the evening, where actually for a little child, for 4, 5, 6 years old, that time actually might work a lot better, because by 7 p.m. they're really tired. For my adults, I actually generally would suggest a more little and often approach. Again, when you've had a really long day at work, or you've got the other commitments. So some of my retired students have not 5 minutes to spare in the day. They completely fill their day from morning till night. So I don't for a second think that being a retired learner is in any way, shape or form that relaxing, to be honest, not from the ones that I teach anyway. So little and often does tend to work for, the working parents, the mums who stay at home. You find that, your day just goes. I know how that feels. And then for my retired students, exactly the same thing. As I said, they seem to fill their days with so many different activities, which is brilliant. But you do have to be very conscious of your time and try to fit that practice in. So the little and often approach does tend to work for my adults, generally across the board, whatever their situations are. Now this one's a fun one. Setting reminders on your phone. My phone saves me multiple times a day. I have so many different things that I have to remember, and I do have a planner. I love a good planner, but actually sometimes I'm just not in the room, or the twins are shouting at me or whatever, and I just don't see the planner, and my phone reminds me of things. And honestly, one of the nice bits is when the children start getting, so my children's students, they start getting their own phones. When they set up reminders on their phone, it does make them feel a little bit more in control of their practice, that little bit more grown up. So I would say for a parent, maybe also put these reminders on your phone, but giving them that little bit of responsibility is a really good idea. For the younger children, one way to get them involved in kind of feeling in control of their practice, I guess, is to get them to create a practice poster. They would write the days of the week that obviously you would discuss together, the slot that you think would work for them on that day for practice, and you've also taken into account the length of time, and then they start to write on this poster the day, the time. If you want to make it into sort of a reward chart, you can add sort of a tick option at the end, or a star chart on the end, and just make it as interesting and as colourful and as them as you can. They really like this, and for my little ones I tend to laminate them so that they can put it up on the wall or on the piano or something. It's not going to get too dirty. Obviously over time this changes, and they can just go and create a new one if they need to, but that really helps to get them involved. And again, it just makes them feel like they're not being dictated to with their practice, and hopefully they won't rebel quite as much if they've had a hand in it. The biggest tip I will give you is please don't compare what you're doing to what somebody else that you know is doing, whether they be a completely different level or exactly the same position as you at the same time on the same piece. Try to manipulate your practice so that it suits you, and be flexible with that. Things change in your life, your situations change, sometimes your mentality will change, particularly with the COVID issue we've had over the past year and a half. I've certainly noticed a change in how some of my students have practiced. It's gone a little bit up and down. I think at the beginning, when everyone was in lockdown, it was actually really good for practice in a lot of ways. I found that quite a few of them progressed more than they had before COVID had hit in a very short space of time. But that situation, the novelty wore off very quickly for a lot of people, and so you started to see some of the more mental aspects coming in. And you have to know that not every day is the same. You don't feel the same way every day. Use these tips as a way to create something that is a routine for you, but it's not set in stone, and give yourself a little bit of grace with it. Definitely aim for progression, but please don't put yourself under any pressure to fulfill that timer of half an hour. That really isn't prudent. Sometimes you'll find that you'll sit down at a piano, and once you get going, you've been there for 40 minutes and it's felt like 5. Other times you've been there for 5 minutes and it feels like 40. That's when you have to say to yourself, do you know what, I'm going to do the warm up, I'm going to do a little bit of time capped practice, but instead of doing 5 bars, I'm going to do 1. And that's okay. A teacher would much rather hear 1 bar of progression than 5 bars of pure frustration. So find what works for you, play around with it, have a bit of fun, but just try as much as you can to give yourself that tiny little bit of structure, just so that it motivates you as much as anything else. I hope you found this helpful. In all honesty, as I said, this is the biggest conversation starter that I have with new starters, with people that have been here for years. It comes up time and time and time again, and my students and I will go through their practice routine, their schedule, their diary, and really try and find a way that works, and it will change around, and that is absolutely fine. So, I really hope that there's something in here that you can glean from it, and that you can take a little bit of control over your practice and come out feeling a lot better about it at the end of the day. So if you found this helpful, I will also link the blog in the description bar below, so that you've got that to have a read of as well, and you can go back and check some bits if you need to. But if you did find it helpful, please give this video a thumbs up. It will really help this channel, so I know what subject people really like to discuss. I suspect that practice is probably one of the big ones, but it really does help me to kind of fine tune what areas we might need to go into a little bit more later on. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.